G'day legends, welcome to this episode of the Process of Success podcast. I'm very lucky to have cricket historian and journalist Gideon Haigh here with me today. Gideon, thank you very much for joining me.
Hello, legends.
That's how we address our audience here. They're known as legends. But
are they legends in prospect or legends in reality?
Who knows,
Yeah.
but that's how we like to call our audience, legends.
All right.
Now, Gideon, like I do with all of our guests, I like to take them back to how they first got into cricket.
Okay.
Now, what is your earliest memory of cricket?
My earliest memory of cricket would probably be looking over my father's shoulder as he watched a test match in around about 1971 on the television, on a black and white television, and asking my mother, "What's Dad looking at?" And she said, "Oh, it's cricket. Some people find that interesting, but to me it's just completely boring." So I thought, well, that sort of piqued my my youthful curiosity, because I sort of thought of myself as sort of, even at that age, as being sort of discerning and interested in new experiences and new layers and complicated things. So I thought, this could be challenging. But my mother and father were divorced not long afterwards, and I sort of stumbled into cricket round about 1974, when I just started to read the sport pages of the newspapers, started to see it on television, there was a captivating Ashes series on in Australia that summer with sort of larger than life characters, and it introduced you also to the antiquity of the Ashes. You got a strong sense of the continuity of the game, as well as the evolution of new personalities. And I began to sort of collect cricket books, because I was quite a bookish child. Bought my first cricket book, which was the Cricketer Annual of 1974-5, every page of which I think I still have photographic recall of, and ended up finding my way to a local cricket club, St James Presbyterian under 12 Bs. There were no Cs. It was entry-level cricket, but I immediately kind of was transfixed by the game. I think because it was so unlike other games. It required courage, it required unselfishness, it required determination. It seemed to have interestingly analogous to human life. I think even then I detected that in cricket, which didn't necessarily emerge naturally from other sports.
And had you played other sports at that stage?
Not really. No, I was I'm sort of puny child, and sort of always with my nose in a book. But the great thing about cricket was that it wasn't just the playing experience, it was the reading experience, it was the imaginative experience, it was the watching experience. This really was a game that you could partake of in all sorts of different forms. And, it was a game that could become a way of life for you.
Absolutely. It's become a good way of life for you in your later life. But
yeah.
Now, back in those days, how did your career develop? Did you sort of get quite good, or did you ever have aspirations to play at a sort of a high level, or was it just something you did?
Not really. It was something I did and something I enjoyed, and I think I pretty soon worked out that I wasn't going to rise to the very top, but I could be proficient, and I could develop different skills. I could sort of establish specialist roles, like I quickly became an opening batsman, for instance, because there was always a dearth of opening batsmen at junior level, and I quite liked the technical challenges of it. I've quite liked facing fast bowling. It was stimulating, and I felt like I could be of service to other players by forming a sort of a protective bulwark for others.
Excellent. And now you're still involved in the game. You're still obviously writing, but you're still playing.
I am still opening the batting, but I've done all sorts of things along the way. It's the great thing about playing cricket at sort of park level, which I've done since the age of 9, is that you can periodically kind of reinvent yourself. When I joined my current club 25 years ago, I decided I'd be an off spinner and bat down the list. So I did that for a while. Then there was a vacancy opened up at the top of the order, so I went up back to opening the batting. Then a couple of years ago, I decided that, well, look, it's my last opportunity to bowl fast. I think I might take the new ball. I might spend a winter lengthening my run and see if I can bowl seam up. So about 3 years ago, I became an opening bowler. But this summer, because there's been a lack of opening batsmen, I've gone back to opening the batting again.
A real utility player.
But there's always a gap, isn't there, at our level, and it's often about the person who puts their hand up to take the opportunity.
So any wicket keeping at all?
It's one thing I've tried in the nets, but I've just found far too daunting. It is much, much more difficult than it looks. I mean, look, all cricket is much, much more difficult than it looks. And I think it's a salutary experience for someone who writes about cricket to go back regularly and to be reminded of just how difficult it is, how fine the line is between success and failure, how injurious failure, even at lower levels, can be to one's own self-possession, one's own self-image, and how satisfying success can be, both individual and team.
I find that, on a personal level as well, with my coaching and mentoring younger players, and then playing on the weekend, I find that I'm going through the same sort of struggles and issues that I'm teaching the younger players. For sure. It's very sort of challenging at times, but also rewarding to sort of pass on what I'm learning, because I certainly haven't mastered it at all either.
And it's a game with a lot of waiting and a lot of time to think. And sometimes you can overthink, but sometimes you can second guess yourself. It's knowing when to make changes and when not to make changes that I think can be the difference between a good player and a great player.
Absolutely, and we'll get onto that in a bit more detail a little bit later. But who have been some of the more interesting and prominent players that you've played with in your club at South Yarra?
Played with. There haven't been too many prominent ones. I mean, Andrew Walton, who you know, who's brought us together today, was my captain coach for some years, and a thoroughly good man and a good cricketer, and a personal friend. I'm constantly admiring Andrew's capacity to be stimulated by the game, to find some new thing about it that hasn't occurred to him before, and to want to discuss it. But I've, going down to my club on a Tuesday or a Thursday night is very important to me, because I work at home and I live on my own, and it's very important to get out of my head. So the practicality of getting on public transport with my cricket bag, going to training is a vital and valued interruption. I mean, part of me feels almost slightly sorry for professional cricketers that they have to go to it as a livelihood. I fear sometimes for them that they lose that recreational aspect of the game, that sense of playing it for pure enjoyment. It can become a very pressured and hectic lifestyle. Certainly not a dream come true. I would never have wanted to earn a livelihood from cricket. I think I would long ago have stopped enjoying it. I think even if I'd simply written about the game might simply have become a source of income for me. But as it is, I'm constantly reminded that it is a game that's fundamentally about being enjoyed. It's about good fellowship.
When I was trialling, I was playing with a lot of freedom and a lot of fun. And as soon as I got my contract, I then had something to lose, and it became different. And I'm sure many, many other cricketers have gone through the same thing. When you sort of have nothing to lose, you play for enjoyment. And then when you've got something to lose, it does change how you play and how you enjoy it.
The funny thing is that even at lower levels of the game, you do feel pressure and you do feel disappointment. And I was talking to some cricketers the other night, some cricketers who had been quite good but who had drifted at club level. They said no matter what the level of the game, it is psychologically quite an arduous game. You very seldom enjoy the contest so much as having been in the contest. It's a little bit like Dorothy Parker's remark about writing. It's hateful to write, but it's lovely having written. I figured everything out for myself. The coach that I had was television. I watched TV and I modelled myself on players that I saw on TV.
Who did you model yourself on?
Growing up, I'm born in England, so I tended to take English role models. My father was from Yorkshire. I felt a weird affinity for Jeff Boycott, because he seemed to be contrary and obdurate and self-sufficient, and I thought they were quite good qualities in a cricketer, or so I thought at the time. I've changed my view probably since then. I identified also with Chris Tavares when he came to Australia in 82-83, in the sense that he seemed like a fish out of water here. He seemed like a player who was struggling to come to terms with an alien and hostile environment, which is sometimes the way in which I felt myself in relation to the world. These weren't simply ideas that I had about cricket, they were ideas that I had about the way in which one lived one's life. but there were players whose sort of technical things I sort of borrowed. I was a great sort of jackdaw who picked up shiny things and adopted little things about backlift and things about forward defensive, or when I bowl off spin, I sort of watched certain off spinners and picked up things from them. Once again, usually through television, because television gave you such a fantastic view, such an intimate view of a player's technique. I've always loved mucking around with technique, perhaps sometimes to my detriment. Infinitely suggest, well, I see something, I think, oh, I might have a go at that. Like I muck around with my guard, or muck around with the way in which I pick up my bat. And sometimes that's because it doesn't really matter all that much. It's just interesting to feel how different the game can feel in terms of a minor adjustment.
When you say it doesn't matter that much, why is that?
Because I'm not playing for sheep stations, but I'll fiddle around in the nets about should I battle on? I battled on middle and off last season, but I've moved back to middle this season. I've adopted a new trigger movement this season. It hasn't quite worked out, but I'm interested in experimenting with it. I think the whole ethos of coaching has changed over the last 20 years. Because there are more coaches, they feel more pressure to justify their existences. They feel a greater sense of kinship and identification with individuals because there are more of them, more coaches to fewer players. They want to feel as though they have a measurable impact, particularly if they're an ex-player. An ex-player no longer has the gratification of their own performances. In some respects, they live out their experiences vicariously, and they partake in a partial way of the success of their charges, and they feel disproportionately disappointed when those charges don't do well.
Fascinating. So on that, do you think ex-players make good coaches in general?
I think some of them do. I mean, this is not an original thought, but I've heard it expressed by others that great players don't necessarily make great coaches because the game has come too naturally to them. And one of their gifts has been an ability to radically simplify what they do. They find lesser gifted players much more difficult to identify with and their struggles to unravel. I'm just trying to think who have been the really successful coaches in cricket. I'm struggling to think of a pantheon of coaches who have been verifiably successful everywhere they've gone. In some respects, coaching is about a weird sort of admixture, a combination of player, circumstance, conditions, country, culture, and individual that can't necessarily be automatically replicated elsewhere.
You need all the elements to sort of come together.
You do, yeah. And no one can really predict it. No one can really predict how personalities will gel until they do.
What I'm finding amazing, or very interesting, I suppose, is my conversations with Bucky, who's a very good friend of mine, and he's the coach up at the National Performance Centre, and through what he's doing and then what I'm doing with cricket mentoring, we're having conversations almost on a daily basis, and probably it's 50-50, I'd say, with technical, what we're learning or what we're seeing, but also communication. How important communicating with people is. He had to do something with the group he's in charge of in Adelaide at the moment, and he sort of asked my opinion or my advice on how to approach the situation from a communication point of view, and something that I've really started to realise is how important communication in coaching is. I mean, I think it seems Chris's father, John, who's a mate of mine, he was a teacher, and I think over the journey, a lot of successful coaches in Australia have been teachers, have come from an educational background. They understand young people. They have an intuition for what kind of messages stick and what kind of messages pass by. And they just have a general good teachers have a general human sympathy. It's funny that as coaching has become more specialised, perhaps we've over-accented the technical and on-field accomplishment to the capacity to impart wisdom. I think the other thing that we haven't done particularly well in coaching in Australia is we haven't taught players how to learn. We're very obsessed with teaching, but we're not so cognizant of learning. How is a player meant to approach the profusion of coaching advice that they nowadays receive? Because a young player, a young elite player, will go through
multiple hands in the course of their career, even over the course of a season. What messages are they meant to take on? What messages are they simply meant to consider? What messages should they feel free to reject?
Well, on that note, I was speaking to Scott Muhlman yesterday, who's Mitch Marsh's batting coach, and he said Mitch has been feeling quite confused.
Yeah, I'm sure.
He's been through so many
Yes,
things.
yeah.
He's sort of Scotty, he's his coach and he trusts, and Scotty and he have developed a great relationship, and they've spent a fair bit of time working on his game, and now he's with Vogsy at WA, and there's a few other coaches there, and then he's got JL in Australia, in the Australian team, and he's got Graham Hick, and he said he's getting multiple opinions, and he's such a good bloke that he's trying to keep everyone happy, and it sort of feels like he just needs to go back to what worked. And so for young, and that's a sort of quite an experienced cricketer in the Australian team, so for younger guys who are going through rep cricket, grade cricket and whatever, it is a skill in itself, I suppose, to understand how to deal with that.
Yes, yeah. I guess that the most valuable coaches are the ones who've known us over the longest time, who've been able to follow, who know something about our background, something about our story, something about the way in which our technique is developed, something about the things that routinely go wrong with technique, something about the things that you need to be reminded of. Jeff Boycott had this coach that he went back to, a guy called John Lawrence, and he used to go back to him at the start of every season, and Lawrence would just check to see how Boycott compared to the previous year, because he obviously had a technique that worked for him, but sometimes the force of competition, changes in his sort of physical makeup as he got older, his recent run of form and his level of confidence, those were the things that kind of changed, and he just needed a few words to set him on the right path again. And Boycott was as technically proficient and diligent a player as you could possibly have, but even he needed an external set of eyes.
And Kevin Peterson has spoken about that in the video.
Yeah, Graham Ford.
Going back to Graham Ford, and after 2 or 3 balls, he said, "You're not getting your head over your front." It's just that eye that knows you well and your game well that puts you back on track. So, what do you see as important in developing young players in this current environment of cricket that we live in?
Look, it's easy for it's difficult for me to make arguments from the point of view of a technical expert, because I'm not a technical expert by any means. I'm interested in technique, but I'm by no means expert. I haven't succeeded at the top level. But I guess the thing that we have been reminded of lately, and which has been on my mind for some years, is we just need to make them into good people. We need to make them into good men and women. And to remind them that the game is there to be enjoyed, that it shouldn't, it's a means to enjoyment, it's not an end in itself, and that there are all sorts of satisfactions that one can find in the game that aren't merely related to the performance of a day earlier. And I guess I fear sometimes that we're just not equipping players to do anything outside the game, to have any existence beyond their day-to-day performances. Once again, it's a case of expenditure meeting income. We've got the capacity to create a system that can consume them from cradle to grave 24 hours a day, but we run the risk of destroying their enjoyment of the game at the same time. It was interesting, I was having a chat to a parent recently, a former first-class player who's got a boy in the pathway system at the moment. And he had been getting his kind of program from the National Cricket Centre over the off season, the various kind of technical hurdles and the various physical targets that he had to fix, and the workloads that he had to follow, and the weights that he had to lift, and the 2K time trials and the skin folds that he had to meet. And he hit the start of the season and he was exhausted, and he said, "Dad, I need to take a break. I'm sick of cricket." Wow. And I thought, that's a terrible indictment of the system if we're actually in the process of regimenting cricket like this, ceasing to make it an enjoyable activity.
Absolutely. It should be, that's every single cricketer gets into the game because they falls in love with the game because they enjoy it. And then maybe when you start to love it, you think maybe one day I could play professionally, and somewhere along the way you lose that enjoyment. And that's something that we're big on with cricket mentoring is one of our sort of catchphrases or mottos is, helping people become their best on and off the field.
Yes.
You think you've got to help people become
Yeah.
the best they can be
Yes.
off the field as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Do we disapprove? Does the system disapprove of players who are perceived to enjoy themselves too much? I mean, Buck's an interesting example, isn't he? You know, he took a long time to get to the top, but he always says that he enjoyed himself along the way, that he never lost that capacity to enjoy himself. And in fact, in his international career, he actually found it quite arduous and needed to make time to get away from the game. He's very interesting on this subject. Perhaps he would feel differently if he hadn't had the experience of getting that last minute opportunity, that 11th hour opportunity to play cricket for Australia. That kind of vindicated the approach that he'd taken, and maybe sort of wore away some of the bitterness that he might otherwise have accrued. But he always seemed to me to have a very sane perspective on the importance of the game, even though he loved it dearly and he thrived on its challenges.
And young athletes these days, young cricketers, I think that they, like you say, they can get so consumed on performance and everything that comes with being a professional and playing that they don't have anything outside of cricket. And when their cricket's not going well, their life's not going well. And I think that it really should be encouraged for cricketers or any athlete to go and find a passion or something outside of the game that makes them level and also gives them perspective. Yeah,
but I know that, you know, from talking to professional cricketers trying to make their way, that's easier said than done. And sometimes when you're doing something else, when you're trying to find that external passion, or you're studying, or you're performing some other form of recreation, you can feel as though you're cheating yourself. You're not dedicating yourself 100% to the goal which everyone says you have to achieve. And I've known even quite intelligent cricketers to feel that way, to feel as though I'm doing this for the sake of going through the motions of doing something else, but what I really should be doing is getting more volume.
And again, it comes back to each personality, I suppose. Some people can do that, and some people need to just be full on.
Yes. But we don't adjust, do we? The system is a one-size-fits-all system that demands the body of the cricketer every cricketer on equal terms. Talking to some players who play at first class level, the length of the pre-season that they're now undergoing, and the obligations of that pre-season, the regimentation of that pre-season. When you're not in the nets, you're at the gym, you're in meetings. It just, if anything could be calculated to dull a cricketer's competitive edge, it would be that idea of having a completely structured day. Frankly, you choose cricket because it does have these long periods of waiting. It does have these peaks and troughs and periods away and very intense periods in. You don't choose cricket because it's like football, where the player walks in on Monday morning to his football club and his week is structured. You know, he's got a home base to go to. We sometimes seem to be forgetting what makes cricket attractive in the first place, and maybe the people who run cricket don't like it enough.
Maybe it would be an interesting sort of case study to see if a coach of a professional team allowed their players to say, this is our 3-month training period. You come and go as you please, you do what you need, and let's see what sort of results we get, and see if you're feeling flat one day, there's no guilt in not going to training. Because I know that a lot of players, there's optional training sessions, and guys might not want to go, but they feel they have to because they get judged if they don't. I think it'd be fascinating to see, and whether it would happen one day or not, I imagine it will at some point. But a sort of out-of-the-box thinking coach goes, all right, Marcus Harris, if you don't want to train in the pre-season for 3 months because you think you would need to go to Europe to get away from the game, let's see how you perform on the field. And if that works best for you, so be it. And you might have
But what's the coach doing in the meantime? Is the chief executive of the State Association going, doesn't seem to be anyone at training?
No, that's why everyone would have to buy into it. And that's where all the books I've read or listened to about winning environments and sporting teams, it's a whole, not the coach doing one thing, everyone's on the same page, buying into the same sort of idea, I suppose.
But I'm also reminded of that remark of Keynes's about it is better to fail conventionally than to succeed unconventionally. When people succeed unconventionally, other people get very threatened.
And so it would take some strong personalities, I suppose, or secure people to do it.
Yes.
Whether it happens or not, one day we'll see, but it'd be worth seeing if it works. Now, what qualities do you think people need to be able to perform at the highest level? Obviously, you're here for the test match at the moment.
Yeah.
You're going to be watching it closely.
Yes.
You've followed cricket for a long time.
Yeah.
What are the qualities as people do you think cricketers need?
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, even the best players fail. Even the best players fall short. Virat Kohli, great player as he is, last time he played against Australia in India in 2017, he seemed to have an excess of the qualities that we're now praising him for. That extreme intensity, that extreme competitiveness. I texted George Bailey a few weeks ago. George had been having a terrible run in the Shield. I follow the Shield scores closely, and I follow the players that I like closely. And I was a bit worried about him, and that was the week that he quit as Tasmanian skipper. I texted him saying, good luck. I'm sorry to hear that you're in bad form. And he actually texted back and said, I actually feel okay. I feel all right. I feel as though it's not far away. I'm looking forward to not captaining. I'm looking forward to the next game. I thought, that's a strong personality who's capable of doing that, who's capable of just cutting off the past and rationalising it and looking forward to tomorrow. I guess that's the kind of thing that a player with his experience can do. And with George, of course, he's not sort of just short of Australian selection anymore. He doesn't have to worry about his next performance in terms of endearing himself to the national selectors. But players' ability to handle failure, because cricket will give you much, much more failure in your career than it will success. Those peaks of success are relatively isolated. More often than not, you'll be performing in a middling fashion, and some days the game will feel entirely wretched. It's challenging to do that in a team environment, to fail in front of your fellows and to have to put the best face on that, to go out with them in the evening, to recreate among them and partake of other people's success and enjoy that. That's something that we don't talk about very much in cricket, but it is absolutely fundamental to cricket. The fact that we get immediately measurable estimation of our success and failure. And it doesn't matter to the scorebook that you nicked a good one. It doesn't matter that you got a brilliant catch or a bad decision. And it also doesn't matter at the same time whether you got a bit lucky. Marcus Harris got 250. That sort of beat his path into the Australian team. I watched a bit of that innings. He played and missed a lot early. He was dropped at 90, a very easy catch. But he turned it into a big score. Good for him. You've got to seize those opportunities when they come along. But boy, oh boy, that line between success and failure.
Absolutely. And another point that I wanted to just bring up from what you were saying before is about, I think, it's such a skill, or it's such a thing young players need to try and learn, is to be very level as people,
yes.
regardless of their results.
Yes.
I lived with Sam Robson, who played a handful of tests for England.
Yeah.
And one thing that I learned from Sam was not to get too high when things are going well and not to get too low. You're in here on the Monday is what matters. You're getting your process right. You're working hard at your game, and the results will look after themselves in the long term. But it's such a hard thing to do, isn't it? Yeah.
Alistair Cook is a player who I just loved watching. I learned a lot from him. I remember watching him walk across Lords before the Test match of 2015, walking from the nursery across to the pavilion. And he walked at this incredibly level pace. He wasn't hurrying, but he wasn't dragging his feet at the same time. He stopped off to chat to, I think it might have been Graham Swan. They exchanged a joke. He walked past the middle. He stopped to talk to the curator. He talked to some of the ground staff. There was no sort of airs and graces about him. And he just carried on all the way across. And I thought, that is a man leading his life at a test match pace. He's directed, but he's not hurried. And he carried that same air of not being flustered at the crease, even when he was out of form, even when he wasn't making runs. Coming back from the Perth Test last season, where he failed and he looked in really ordinary form. I saw him on the plane, and then I saw him at the baggage carousel afterwards. He was travelling with his family, with his wife and kids. He just looked really settled. He looked really content. He looked really assured. He was gathering up his kids and gathering up his luggage and just once again moving at an unhurried pace. Had a smile for everyone, very understated, no sort of very unassuming. I thought, boy, if you can carry yourself under these circumstances, they'd lost the Ashes by that point, and Cook was under a lot of pressure and later confessed to having acute doubts about his ability to come back. But somehow, if you'd been around him, you would never have known. And perhaps that was his way of convincing himself that he was still in control.
Well, I sometimes have questioned whether sort of what I refer to as David Warner's belief is them convincing themselves that they're not far off it.
Sure.
And no doubt it is. Our self-talk is really important. We don't want to be telling ourselves, no, I'm not playing well. We've got to try and manage that self-talk. And on that note, we've talked a bit about technical, but how important do you think the mental skills in cricket are? And I suppose, why isn't it really spoken about or emphasised as much in junior cricket?
Look, it's different strokes for different folks. You know, there are certain players who do not want to think about the game and who are best off just doing it intuitively. There are some players who need to go through a process of mental reasoning to convince themselves that they're in form. There are others who need to get away from the game completely. There are others who need to prepare intensely. I guess at junior levels of the game, players haven't quite decided what kind of player they're going to be. But it's pretty clear that there is something sort of special and unique about those players who do make it. There is something qualitatively different about them. It's like, you know, Scott Fitzgerald's line about the rich. The rich are not like you and I. They're different. The great players are different. The very proficient players are different. The player that I've known best and with whom I'm a friend is Ed Cowan. I've known Ed for more than 10 years and before, during and after his Test career. Now, Ed is a very highly intelligent, very thoughtful, very courteous, very poised man who conducts himself with great dignity and confidence. Extremely reasonable, very modest in all respects, but about his cricket there was always, I could detect under the surface, a certain steel about him when he talked about the game, when he talked about challenges, when he talked about opponents, when he talked about matches. He always sounded underneath. He had this quiet confidence that he was going to succeed. And I used to look at him and think, well, that's something I've never had as a player. I've always been suffused with doubts. I've always been incredibly gloomy after failure. I've always been incredibly negative in the way in which I've approached every game. And I've been occasionally I've been surprised by success. And I've never taken particularly satisfaction in it because I always knew that failure was around the corner. Ed was different. Ed was different. It wasn't a great player by any means, but he got the most out of himself by just that inner core of strength. That's as close as I've come to seeing how a really good player operates, and it was very instructive.
Interesting, yeah, and everyone's different, but I suppose the very best have some sort of like fight or some sort of grit that in the contest, no matter whether they're playing well or not, in form or out of form, they just are up for the battle.
Yeah.
What traits do you think the best leaders possess that you've seen?
Well, I mean, look, I've played under lots of captains, and frankly, at my level of cricket, it's about turning up on time, in correct attire, and bringing afternoon tea. So you don't actually need to do much to become a successful captain at grade level. I think what impresses me about leaders in walks of life where I've worked, I mean, editors who I've worked with. Editors are among the most unselfish people of all, the best of them, because their names don't achieve any great prominence and they're all about making other people look good. And the best editors I've had have always kind of placed themselves at the service of others. They've been very self-effacing and they've taken satisfaction in a collective effort. And I think that has really stood out to me. When you've come across individuals like that, they do distinguish themselves very obviously, and they do get the best out of people. They don't manage upwards, they manage downwards. They take a pastoral interest in their underlings. They get to know them as people. They understand that people are at different levels of development. They don't sort of set a level of mandatory standards that everyone has to observe, except in a kind of sort of a moral sense. They're looking at their relative state of development and they're judging them against that. They're flexible thinkers, if you like, and they're able to take satisfaction in little achievements where someone outdoes what they've done previously. They notice small things, and they draw the individual's attention to those small things. You just did that thing successfully, which you weren't able to do yesterday. I had very good mentors in journalism when I was younger who were capable of doing that, who probably persuaded me that I was a little bit better than I was. And that meant a lot to me at a young and impressionable stage of my writing career.
Awesome, and that's what I suppose good mentors do, is they probably reassure people when they just aren't sure themselves sometimes, and that really gets the most out of themselves.
Well, you're not even conscious of the mentoring. They convince you that you did that, that you didn't actually need their help. They eliminate themselves from the process, and you only kind of retrospectively realise how much they contributed to it.
Now, you've mentioned the editors and the mentoring you had when you were starting out, but when and how did you get into cricket writing?
Well, I joined the Age in 1984 out of school. I just applied for a cadetship and got it. I was 18. I wanted to leave home. I was keen to do something rather than go to university. So I went to the Age, got sent to the business section, wrote in the business section for about 5 or 6 years. Then I went overseas and worked as a stringer, a business stringer in London. And while I was there, I started to write about cricket because I was in a cricket playing country. My hours were flexible. I got the opportunity to go and watch quite a lot of county cricket, which I enjoyed watching. I reported on a few test matches back for the Age. There was an England-New Zealand series and an England-India series that summer, which I went to. I got accreditation for. I just sort of... It's not that I'd always wanted to write about cricket. And in fact, in some respects, if I'd never written about cricket, it wouldn't have meant anything about my enjoyment or love of the game. I come to cricket chiefly as a player and a watcher that just so happens to write about the game now. But I found as though I didn't necessarily have things to say, but there was things that I wanted to hear said that perhaps weren't being said by other writers. I wanted to do a kind of a writing that was something that I myself would like to read. And there sort of weren't maybe the cricket writers around at that time who were writing about it exactly as I wanted to be written about. It sounds a bit pretentious that way, but I wanted to apply my intellect to cricket writing, and I wanted to study the game at different levels. I didn't want to study simply the game that had taken place the year before. I was interested in the individuals, I was interested in the history, I was interested in the economics, I was interested in the politics. To me, cricket writing just had so many different layers that you could access, that you could study it through, so many different prisms. It really was, you were as limited as your own imagination. And ever since then, I've tried to write about cricket in as many different ways as I possibly can. And I've also written about other things at the same time. I've written about written several business books. I've written several books about social policy. I've written books about the arts. I've written books about, I've written corporate histories. I've tried to have a career where I've known a lot about a little and a little about a lot. And cricket's been the thing that I've known a lot about. And it's a tiny little niche subject. Let us forget it's a relatively small game. It's a relatively small pursuit as pursuits go, but it's infinitely interesting. And I'm satisfied that there are things about it that I'm still to learn, and that I'll know at the end of this test match that I don't know now.
Well, let me just take this moment to say well done on everything you've done, and also thank you. My mother is a big fan, and she used to always say, she loved your work, loved your writing, so she'll be very pleased to hear that I'm chatting with you today. But take this moment to say thank you very much for everything you've done and the insights you share, because they are fascinating and they are different to most other writers.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Thanks, I appreciate it.
So, but you travel the world, you're watching cricket and writing about cricket, and it's something that a lot of our young players and fans watching and listening would love to do. Yeah. What advice would you have for a young cricket lover who might want to pursue a career in cricket writing?
My advice to everyone wanting to pursue a career in writing is to read. is to read as copiously and as broadly and as eclectically as you possibly can, and to read closely, to read with a blue pen in your hand so that you could mark the passages that you like, where you think that a writer has achieved a certain effect, where you think that a writer has expressed something successfully, and ponder how the writer has gone about doing that.
On that note, how do you sort of see, you've brought a book here, but do you have value in audiobooks or Kindles, or are you more about the...
I've got about, when I moved out of my house in 2012 to renovate it, the storage people said that I had 5 tons of books. And I've only added to it then. I've probably added another 3 tons. I read a lot. I'm reading all the time, but I'm trying to read in a practical way. I don't actually often read recreationally. If I read, I want to learn something about A, the subject, but B, also writing. I want to read across a range of things. I'm often highly influenced by what I'm reading at the time, or something that I've read in the distant past. If you sort of read my writing very closely, you'd probably detect all sorts of weird echoes and themes that I go back to, and ideas that I explore. But reading is what distinguishes a writer. Whenever a writer comes to me and says, I want to be a writer, I say, what are you reading right now? Are you reading constructively? Are you reading the right things? Are you reading in a concentrated and directed way? And often they look at me in a sort of puzzled way. They think that writing is all about just sitting down at the laptop and churning it out, but it's not like that at all. Lots got to go in before something worthwhile will come out.
Well, I suppose that's how you learn as a writer, is by consuming that understanding and knowledge.
Yeah.
And do you have any sort of good books that come to mind for any young cricketers? Not necessarily cricket books, but anything, life experience or anything like that you would recommend? Obviously, younger people might not be on the same sort of level of intellect as you, but what sort of books or any titles you can recommend?
Well, I mean, they're probably not cricket books. I read some books for sort of inspiration periodically, but although they're not sort of inspirational books. There's a book that I read every year. It's called In Search of Churchill by Martin Gilbert. Martin Gilbert was the official biographer of Winston Churchill, published the life in 11 volumes over the course of about 30 years. And it's about how he did it, how he researched the life, and how he drew conclusions from the facts that passed through his hands. And I'm someone who takes the raw material of fact, and turns it into a set of ideas and a set of principles. And the rigour with which Gilbert interrogated the material, and the diligence with which he accumulated it, and the fastidiousness with which he went about forming his opinions by balancing evidence on both sides, I go back to it again and again because I think, look how hard he worked to do this. This is a reminder of just how hard it is to do the job well. And I finish the book and I think, this is what I want to do with my life. This is something really worthwhile. This is something that you can dedicate yourself to, and something that you can feel as though you're doing better year on year, month on month, even week on week.
Interesting. So it's all applicable to you.
For sure. I mean, I'm often reading because I haven't read a particular writer before. I'm always conscious of needing to backfill. That's a writer he's important. I should read him. I'm reading Hugh Kingsmill today, a collection of Hugh Kingsmill's literary criticism, which I bought for 25 cents. The idea of buying something for 25 cents and finding something worthwhile in it is appealing to me as well. He's terrific, actually, terrific writer. But I'm reading because not necessarily because I'm going to be writing about cricket, but because I'm going to be writing over the next few days. And I want to get myself into the right sort of headspace to be writing.
It's like a cricketer going to the nets.
Like a cricketer going to the nets, yeah.
Before the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Now, you've been very generous with your time. We're going to wrap up shortly, but final few questions, and back to the cricket field. Where is technology starting to shape cricket in your eyes? There's been some great advances in technology over the last few years, and you being a close cricket watcher, how do you see technology now, and how do you see technology moving into cricket further in the future?
It's a good question. I mean, the clearest change has been in bat technology, hasn't it? The bats are so much better than they were 10 years ago, and I experienced that at club level now. I almost regret having used such ordinary equipment for my entire career. In some respects, maybe they've made the game too easy. Maybe batsmen have become so absorbed in the ability to achieve levels of power that they think they can kind of hit their way out of trouble, and that the game's all about the quality of the contact you're making, rather than the ability to kind of bat when conditions are against you. Maybe we've become so conditioned to this idea of we have to feel good when we're batting that we find it difficult to cope with feeling bad. Because sometimes, well, actually the best cricket that you play, the characteristic cricket that you play will be that takes place out of your comfort zone when you're actually straining against the limits of your ability.
And finding a way when it's not working.
Yes, yeah. I think sometimes we're inclined to overestimate the importance of feeling confident going in. Sometimes you actually need to feel a little bit uncomfortable in order to explore the limits of your abilities. The other thing that's become technologically much important is the monitoring of the generation of data. And we monitor players' sort of physical and mental well-being almost obsessively now, in addition to their on-field performances. I sometimes question just how significant that data is, whether we're simply collecting it for the sake of collecting it. Are we actually learning anything from it? I mean, clearly at some level, it's important that players are accountable to a wealthy professional system, but cricketers thrive, or the best cricketers have thrived in an environment of freedom and experimentation. Have we become too controlling of cricketers? Are we just not letting them be their own people?
Well, I know that Cricket Australia has their AMS, their athlete management system, and the young players have to log things.
Yes.
Like how much water they've drunk, how they were feeling on that day, and this and that and the other. And sometimes the players that I've spoken to have said, I can't be bothered, this is draining, and it's like almost contributing to their fatigue. And obviously Cricket Australia wants to have an overall picture on how they are, but maybe it's too much.
Well, Buck was trying to convince me the other day that the AMS was a boon for cricket, and I know I'll be watching this, so I just wanted to register with you, Buck, that I was listening to you.
I'm sure
I was paying attention.
Positives. I'm not saying it's all negative, I'm just saying that's what I've heard from some people. Now, a couple of questions from our good friend Andrew Walton. How much fun at the time was writing the book The Vincibles?
That was The Vincibles, for those who don't know, is a book that I wrote about my club in the season of 2001-2, and it came about because when I went to England in 2001 to write for The Guardian, I got to the end of the summer and The Guardian said, would you like to become our Australian cricket writer? And I said, well, actually, I like playing too much. I don't really want to tour. My Saturdays are important to me. And the sports editor said, well, why don't you write a column about your club? I thought, well, yeah, okay, all right, I'll do that. The column was called A Lot of Hard Yarra. And so I sort of did it for The Guardian, and by the end of the summer I'd accumulated enough pieces to put the book together. The interesting thing was that I worried at the time whether the act of observing and recording would make a difference to people's behaviour. I didn't want people at the club to do things for the sake of having it written about in a book. So I sought my committee's permission to do it, and I did it in a very low-key fashion. I mean, I was writing for a newspaper on the other side of the world. They weren't reading what I was writing anyway. But I didn't want things to change, and it's one of the reasons why I haven't gone back to do it again, because I'm a little bit worried about turning my club into sort of a vehicle for my own kind of, I don't know, aggrandisement or my own gratification. To me, it's much more important at the club to be just another cricketer. It pleased me when I'd been there for about 5 or 6 years, and the guy was giving me a lift home one night, and he said, it's funny you having the same name as that cricket journalist. I thought, excellent.
Wow. Well,
excellent.
Gideon, that's amazing. I think I probably sit on the very opposite end of that spectrum, because I do a vlog for YouTube.
Yeah.
And I bring my camera, and I've got my videographer here today, down to training.
Right.
And capture what I'm doing. And I often
Right.
wear a microphone that you've got on
Right,
today
right.
while I coach.
Right.
And I often have the boys saying, "Come on, get me on the story, get me on." They want, because we've gathered a reasonable size following.
Yeah.
That everyone wants their own sort of pump up.
Yeah.
So I'm certainly not doing it low key, and I actually played a 2020 match on the weekend where I wore a microphone as I played.
Oh my God.
And I sought the permission of my teammates and said, "Boys, does anyone have an issue if I do this?" And the boys are loving it. And like you say, they probably are acting differently, but they were loving getting involved and trying to get in the camera and speak in the microphone and stuff. So I'm very much at the opposite end.
Well, I'm not on Twitter, and if you ever see me on Twitter, you'll know that it's over, because I always get to technology about one generation late.
So anyway, my vlog has really evolved over the last 18 months or so. But
I'm also not very good with technology, as you can see from my phone.
But all I'm sure you need is a laptop, and then you spread your message to the world, which is excellent. Now, this is another question from Andrew Walton. If you were captain, where would you back Glenn Maxwell in the order?
Good question. Very good question. Because I would certainly like to have him in. I've always been a big Maxi fan. Probably bat him 6. I think that's where his gifts are naturally attuned at international level. But I think he should probably bat 4 for Victoria. That would give him a better opportunity to press his case. I would certainly like to see him get the opportunity to play a test match in Australia. I think it's iniquitous that he's never played in front of his own audiences, when we know that basically every player internationally these days has a much better home record than they do an away record. But I worry about the degree of trust that there is in people whose opinions matter in Australian cricket, and whether he'll get a fair go.
Time will tell, I guess.
Yes.
Time will tell. Now, final couple of questions, which I ask all of our guests. What is your definition of success?
It's difficult because I often feel like I've failed in what I do. I mean, I set myself very high standards in my writing, not quite so high standards in my cricket. I can't afford to have those. But I often finish pieces having felt as though they didn't quite work out the way that I hoped. And I certainly finish books always feeling as though it didn't quite come off. I'll have to do another book in order to apply all the lessons that I learned from the failure of the last book. So I mark myself very hard, and I don't want to feel too successful. I need that sort of burr under the saddle to keep myself wanting to get better. That's a constant challenge for a writer, because basically in newspapers they're pretty much happy if you file on time and to length, and there's sort of no great jury of your peers looking over your shoulder and evaluating whether this piece is better than the day before. And the best and the worst moment of every day for a cricket journalist, or at least in my experience, is the minute that you press the send button, because that's the minute that you realise, that's the thing that I should have said, and it's now too late for me to say. Oh well, I'll just add that to the store of things that I might say somewhere down the track. So I don't feel particularly successful on a day-to-day basis. So I'm not sure that I entirely recognise what those sensations are like. Success for me at the Yarras, though, at my club, which is very dear to me, has been about the sensation of walking on the field on a Saturday or a Sunday, and knowing that because I've been involved in the administration of the club for so long, and I've been part of the furniture for 25 years, is the satisfaction I get from feeling as though I helped to make it happen. That even if I don't succeed today, even if I don't make runs or take wickets, I contributed something to the making of this culture, and it's a good culture. It's a happy culture. It's a reinforcing culture. It's a friendly and inclusive culture. That gives me enormous pleasure. And to see how the club has grown over time, to see the different personalities kind of contribute to the common weal, that's given me more satisfaction in cricket than anything I've achieved as a player or as a writer.
Wow. Well, I think every club would do well with having someone like you
Yeah.
involved, and South Yarra are very lucky to have you involved by the sounds of it.
Well, I've been very lucky to find that club. You know yourself, it's very rare to find a really good club, and you don't quit that club on a whim. You know, if you find a good club, I travel an hour and a half on public transport to get to training on Tuesdays and Thursday nights. And sometimes when I put my cricket bag on my shoulder and get myself on a crowded tram, I think, couldn't I have found a club that was a little bit closer to me, or couldn't I have found a game that didn't involve so much heavy equipment? But then I get down there and within 5 minutes, the weight of the world is off my shoulders, and I've got a smile on my face, and I'm with friends and playing a game that I love.
Yeah, awesome. And I love that age is no barrier.
For sure.
Age is no barrier.
Hey,
I won't reveal your age, but...
Well, I'm 52, but frankly, I've got players that I'm playing with who are over 70, who are still going around, who are still golon nous, who know the limitations and succeed, despite age and decrepitude, and love it because they are belying the things that they're being told they can't do.
Absolutely. So finally, which I ask everyone, is why do you play cricket?
Why do I play cricket? Well, because I've always played it. And it's the longest kind of continuous extra-familial thread in my life. It's the thing that I've done every summer. I've made so much of an intellectual and an emotional investment in it now that I would find it difficult to turn my back on the game. I could stop writing tomorrow and I wouldn't feel any particular regret. And that's not a bad feeling for a writer to have, that you could walk away tomorrow and the game would still be something that mattered to you. And they all make the choice to do this thing together when they could be doing something easier or more instantly gratifying or more fun or sexier or richer. I love the fact that we all kind of get down to cricket on Saturday or Tuesday and Thursday and we kind of prostrate ourselves at the altar of the game. We don't know what's going to happen that day. We know that we could fail, we know that we could be disappointed, but we do it to ourselves again and again because there is pleasure in the contest, there is pleasure in the achievement, there is pleasure simply in the participation and the fellowship. I find the environment of a sporting club to be more equal, more open, more egalitarian, and more progressive than virtually any other institution in Australian life. You ask people these days about their relationship to institutions, financial institutions, political institutions, religious institutions, financial institutions, religious institutions. Everyone feels as though they're kind of dwarfed by those systems and that what they do in those contexts can make no difference. But if you walk into a sporting club, you feel as though you could put your shoulder to the wheel and you can make it a better place. Where else do you get that?
Very good point. Thank you so much for your time, Gideon. It's been absolutely fascinating to hear your views and your story. Gideon, thank you very much.
My pleasure, Tom.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.